Hi, everybody. It's Mark Arnstein, Remax Hallmark, and of course, livingnorthtoronto.com. This is the Mark Arnstein Show, podcast number 19. And I'm here today with my very good friend, Mr. Stephen Cooper. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you very much, Mark.
My pleasure. So just so you know, Stephen is a born and raised Torontonian. He went to Osgoode Law School, graduated in 1987, started practicing real estate law in 89, and has been practicing for over 34 years. Stephen runs a phenomenal practice up at Young and Shepherd. One of the things I love about working with Stephen, and we've been working together for, 15 years, I think?
Yeah, at least 15 years.
Yeah, is that, as you just joked earlier, is that Stephen always responds to emails and he always answers his phone. That's his marketing plan 101. Answers his phone and he responds to emails. And that's how it works. It's really good. But it's true, because I can call you pretty much at any time, and I know I'll get a call back within at least 30 minutes, and you're back on the phone with me, and you're able to answer my questions right away, which is so awesome. That's one of the things I love about working with you.
Yeah, I try to answer the phone because I hate voicemail. I hate listening to it. I just want to take care of it right away. So I have a direct line. I tell everyone my direct line, and it makes it easier for everyone.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, so one of the things I want to have Stephen on here today to do and talk about is, I thought so important, is that how to go over some of the mistakes that can happen, whether you're on the buy side of a transaction or you're on the sell side of a transaction. Because depending on who you're working with, there are so many little nuances within the agreement, things that can happen. And we were just talking some of the stuff before we got started with the show. Just little things even let's go with the legal description, for starting right out of the gate.
Yeah. So with respect to the legal description, it's really important for you as a seller to give your agent a copy of your registered transfer, because you really want to put the entire legal description on the agreement of purchase and sale. Most importantly, it's going to tell you whether there's an easement. Every legal description will say subject to together with an easement. And if you miss that, if you just put the lot in the plan, you don't put the easement, you may give a buyer an out. A buyer may be a builder who said, I wouldn't have purchased this without knowing about the easement.
Right.
So you want to give a full legal description on every single agreement of purchase and sale. If you can give your agent a copy of the actual transfer, it will say that. And then it's one less thing to have to deal with later. Yeah,
and because the problem is also, as agents, a lot of us use what's called geo warehouse, which is where we get all the legal information, the seller's full legal names, the legal description of the property. But sometimes what happens is a lot of times agents will write down the lot number and the plan number, and they don't write the rest of the stuff that's actually there.
Right, and missing an easement can in a certain market can actually potentially kill a deal.
And cost you tons of money at the same time too, which is also important as well.
Absolutely,
right?
yes.
Yeah, no, for sure. Let's go on the buying side. One of the things we talked about earlier was about inclusions and exclusions.
Right.
And you talk about today with home automation, which has become so popular in a lot of the homes that are built today, especially for new construction, about the equipment that's going to be included and not included. And there's been some issues you've had in the past.
Right. And this is sort of for the seller. And the general rule for a seller is, and people call me up before they are about to sell a property, and can you review the agreement while it's going on? And I said, it's very difficult at times because often agreements are done at night and they're going back and forth, and it's really hard to get your lawyer at 9 o'clock at night when it's going back and forth. But my number one advice to everyone is don't give anyone anything you don't have. And it's not that you have no knowledge of, right? So you've got to read every word, and we're talking about inclusions like the chattels. And we just had a recent one where the buyer put into the agreement of purchase and sale under the chattels built-in speakers with sound system and related equipment. Well, the seller, and there was a list, they listed everything possible in a house, and it was a multi-million dollar house, so it had all the bells and whistles. So you can imagine it was in separate in schedule, 7 lines of chattels.
Right.
So in this one line were 7 words, but those 7 words created an issue because there were built-in speakers, but there was no sound system connected to it, and there was no related equipment. So when my clients, who are the buyers, went back to look at the house again before closing, where's the sound system for this? Well, no, we don't have one, said the wife.
Right.
And they said, well, it's included. No, all we have are the built-in speakers, but we never really hooked anything up. We just have the built-in speakers, or we hook it up in a different way. And they're saying, well, you promised us a sound system with related equipment. Therefore, we want it. We want you to get it to us. And they came back to say, we're giving you exactly what we have in the house. We're not going any further.
Right.
Now there's an issue.
And what happens when there's an issue? It goes back to the sellers. It goes back to the 2 agents that are going to be involved, mainly also the listing agent,
right?
Who was the one who let his client sign off on that. and it becomes like my sister's an E&O lawyer, so errors and omissions real estate law practice in Vancouver. So
Right, yeah.
and it's like since I started in this business from 27 years ago, she'll always call me, Mark, what would you done in this situation? And I give her the answer. She's like, okay, good, right answer.
Right, yeah.
But the thing is though, as the agent representing the buyers, they should have done a complete walkthrough before they put the offer together and check to make sure the things that they were there were actually there.
Yeah.
So one of the things you can do as a step further to protect yourself would be like, get all the model numbers, right? So like, for instance, like, if it's a Wolf stove, but like actually Wolf stove 6 burner gas range with built-in oven, model number, blah, 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 blah. So you're actually now being extremely specific to make sure there's no gray area as to whether things are included or not included.
Obviously, the more details, the better you'll be, and the less ambiguity is in the end.
Right.
I think it's hard sometimes because when you have the 7 lines of chattels, and I know as a listing agent, you probably put in the chattels are included, but then sometimes a buyer's agent can just throw in a little bit extra, and you miss it because I guess the biggest focus is probably on the purchase price, right? And everyone's going back and forth on the purchase price, and they miss that small part. But you got to be careful on that.
Well, and that's the thing, but lawyers are the essence is in the details, right?
Right,
and
exactly.
you guys are very good at reading through things and make sure that you're checking all the things, make sure everything's there, which is where things get caught.
Yeah.
But, and again, it's like, the problem is, I think, if you look back to say where the market was happening for the last 2.5 years, where everything was going at hyper pace, it was, that's where things were very easy to get caught and missed in the shuffle. Whereas, today especially, you got time to read and look through things and make sure you're crossing your T's and dotting your I's before you get someone to sign off on something. But the thing is, like, we do is like, if it's a higher end house, we'll make a separate page for the chattels to make sure that, it's very detailed as to what is going to be included, so that it becomes a Schedule C.
Right, and it makes sense if it's your page as the listing agent too, right? And then it's your page, and then they're not putting anything in that's not part of it.
And there's no ambiguity, and you're not making sure something's going to get lost in translation.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So for that part of it, that's what you have to look for in the inclusions, and the exclusions are fixtures. So so all fixtures are included unless you want it, are included unless you want it excluded. So if you want to take your dining room fixture with you, you've got to put that specifically in the agreement. You've got to be very careful.
Yeah, no, totally. And then the other one I love that we use, and I never understood why it was written the way it's written, is like, in quote unquote good working order, right? Because obviously your definition of good and my definition of good, and Nikki, who's filming this for us right now, his definition of good is completely different from amongst the three of us, right? Because at the end of the day, I always say either it works or it doesn't work.
Right.
Right? Like, it can kind of work. No, either it works or it doesn't work. So, and there's been issues like you've seen in the past with this as well, right? With things working and not working. Yeah,
no, absolutely. And the problem that you'll have too is it's basically, it's just on the last leg, but it's working. Right? But you kind of then, and the other issue we always have is you have to be prepared for is it's not working as good as they thought, or it's not working at all. But the classic, and I tell my clients this all the time, what happens if it's not working? I said the seller will say it was working when they left, right? That's the line, right? That's how they get out of it. So it's not a bad idea to do a little bit of a testing before you close to make sure it is working. And then those are really hard to deal with, right? Because you're right, because everyone's definition of working is different, right? And from a seller, as long as it's working, it might not be great. You might have a dishwasher that doesn't clean everything perfectly, but it cleans it, right? And it's not up to the specification of what the buyer would think would be properly cleaning it, right?
Right, but does it turn on? Does it work? Is it going through the cycles, right? So, but that's the thing that definitely, and I think where the part where to make sure sellers understand who are watching this, is that as a seller, up until the day, the minute the property closes, you are responsible for it.
Absolutely.
So, right? So if something like,
if it's not working, you got to fix it.
Exactly.
It's your responsibility to make sure it's working.
Yeah. So, or like, it's also your responsibility to maintain the grass and the gardens and all the things that go with the house, that just because you sold it doesn't mean all of a sudden you can let the house go to hell in a handbasket. You got to maintain it, right?
Yes.
So, and we just had an example of this property we had close on Wednesday. Literally the last minute, the seller's moving out, and she calls me in a panic. She's like, "Mark, I'm freaking out." I'm like, "What's going on?" She goes, "I have water all over the floor in the mechanical room." I'm like, "Whoa, okay, what's happening?" She goes, "The boiler is overflowing." I'm like, oh God, because she's got rats in the house, right?
Right.
So what happened was there's a safety valve for the boiler, and because the boiler that initially was installed was undersized for the system, but didn't come up in the home inspection, right? Because they just saw overflow boiler, okay, fine, no problem.
Right.
Or overflow tank, sorry. And anyways, the valve broke. So again, called my guy, jumped right in, got in there right away. We got it fixed. Called the other agent to let them know what was going on and that it was going to be dealt with. And we're, sorry for the inconvenience, but we can still go ahead and close. It's already being arranged. It's taken care of, and it was all good. But I mean, it's life. Stuff happens, right?
Absolutely, and that's the right thing to do. And unfortunately, in the real estate world, sometimes it's what can I get away with?
Right.
Let's not say anything, and hopefully they won't notice, and we'll close, and then we'll deal with it later. And you see too much of that, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and that's the worst part about the whole thing is because at the end of the day, this was I have the guy that I work with, Sam, who I've been working with for years, is phenomenal, and I give him tons of business, and he does a phenomenal job for all our clients. And he's like, Mark, normally this would have been like an $800 fix.
Yeah.
They only charged me like $300.
Right.
So he did a real solid to help because it was last minute situation.
Yeah.
But the point is, as the seller and as the agent, $300 or a lawsuit.
Right.
Take your pick.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. Or even $800 or a lawsuit.
Right.
Take your pick. I mean, it's not rocket science, but people get caught up with the greed and everything else.
But on the other side of the coin, we have situations where the washer breaks the day before closing.
Right.
And the seller is very honest about it. And it's a 20-year-old washer, and the buyer saw it was a 20-year-old washing machine.
Right.
And the buyer will come and say, okay, I would like the $5,000 top-of-the-line washing machine to replace this one and I, as a buyer's lawyer, you've got to say, you were buying a 20-year-old washing machine, which probably wasn't going to last long. We got to get value. If we'll get a credit for whatever the value was of that, and you can apply towards your new one, but you're not entitled, if you're buying a 20-year-old washing machine, to get the top-of-the-line new washing machine paid for by the seller.
Yeah.
Right. And that goes the other way too, right? The buyer has to be reasonable in those situations in order for it to be fair.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, it's like, I'll scratch your back if you scratch my back.
Right. And that's how it works. They're being fair by fixing it, and the buyer's got to be reasonable and not expect the brand new one either.
Yeah, it's not like all of a sudden you had all due respect, Hyundai sitting there, and now all of a sudden you're supposed to get a Rolls Royce.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a little unrealistic.
You go online and you show me that, this top of the line, and I go, well, let's actually go to one of the lower levels of what it would be, and then that's what it would cost you to buy that. And that's really what you were buying. You were buying that level. And even from there, you weren't buying a brand new one. So you've got to be reasonable on those in those kind of disputes.
Yeah. Now, if I'm getting ready to put my house on the market and thinking about selling, do I need to talk to you beforehand, or am I really kind of dealing with you after the fact?
Most of the time, most people don't speak to their lawyers beforehand. It's not a bad idea, because your lawyer is going to give you the advice that I give my clients, which really is I go through certain things of, this is what you just, the main advice, like I said, is don't offer something you don't have. So be careful about survey clauses. Mm-hmm. Most people aren't using surveys or giving surveys because we're all relying on title insurance. And I think a lot of people, even if they have a survey, aren't even handing them out because it's just easier. They don't want to disclose anything, so they just, it's almost accepted. Or we have the clauses survey and possession, which is a safe one. Yeah. So I said, make sure that they don't put in an up-to-date survey if you don't have an up-to-date survey.
Right.
Or if it's an existing survey, make sure you have it in your hand, not something you remember from your purchase 10 years ago that you might not be able to find. Because if you can't find it, you're buying a survey for your buyer.
And the price of surveys have gone up dramatically.
Exactly, yes. Yeah. It's very expensive. So that's really the advice we give. So if you're going to, it's not a bad idea to call your lawyer just to get a reminder of, here's the deed from when you bought. Give this to your agents for the legal description.
Right.
Make sure you're not giving anything. That's the main legal part of it. The part with the chattels is really where the agent comes in and really represents them.
Right.
But for those kind of things, it's really the legal part is the legal description and the survey. Go back to your reporting letter that you got from your lawyer and see if there's anything that happened on the closing, any specific title issues or anything that you may have received. And it's like an encroachment where it said you took the title subject to a certain encroachment that you're going to want to put on your agreement now.
Right.
So that buyer takes as subject to an encroachment. So those kind of things. So get your reporting letter out, get the deed out, give it to the agent, and just make sure that those things are listed. Anything that might be an issue that you sort of took the property with, that your buyer will take it with, doesn't create an issue.
No, for sure. And if you're now looking at buying something, like, do you think, again, same kind of question, like, what really, I mean, you kind of like looking at yourself after the deal is done.
Most of the time we get it after, to be honest with you. It's just because how the market works. Yeah. It's not a bad idea if there's any kind of issues, like there's easements and you want to see what the easement looks like. A lawyer can pull the easement to tell them what the easement's about. So you know what you're getting into.
And we've had many conversations about that, haven't we?
Mark's actually very good that way. If Mark sees an easement, he'll actually write me and say, Steve, can you pull it just and let me know what it is?
And again, like, to pull an easement off land registry, I mean, we're talking like what, 15, I think it's like $15-20.
If you have the instrument number, it's I think $3 or $4.
Yeah, so it's like,
if you're not pulling the parcel page, it's not a lot of money to find out. And I mean, it's not a bad idea, especially if you're looking to do any work on the property, because if you have easements, you can't do work over those easements, and it can limit the kind of work you're doing, whether you're doing an addition to it, a tear down, which is really important, or even just like, we were putting a shed or a garage, and now you find out that you have a right of way, your neighbor has a right of way over your part of the property, and you can't put the garage there. Right. So those are good to know before you go into it.
Right. Yeah, and a lot of times we'll do, like, when we're looking actually at the deal before even writing the contract, I'll call you and I'll ask you that question before.
Right, exactly.
So just to make sure. What's, thinking of stories, fun out loud stuff, what's, some of the craziest stuff you've ever seen?
There was one easement that turned into a major lawsuit, which they didn't disclose the easement, that ended up being about 10 feet in the back of the property.
So small amount.
For neighbors, it was a right of way because of the back. And he couldn't build what he wanted to build, and it was for a developer. And it turned into a lawsuit against pretty much everybody. The buyer's lawyer, who didn't disclose the easement. The sellers, who should have disclosed the easement, the buyer's lawyer didn't see the easement for some reason on the description, or if he saw the easement, didn't think it was important enough to tell his client about it. The seller should have disclosed the easement. The agents should have disclosed the easement because it was in the legal description, but they didn't put the legal description fully on the agreement of purchase and sale again.
Right.
So, and those kind of things. I've had situations where you have possessory situations where outside of it. So you can see, this is actually a problem that we face in some of the older neighborhoods where people just started building gardens. The neighbor would let a person build a garden, and we sort of lost control of lot lines. And then a survey would come in after, and you'd see that this person had had a garden on their property for 3 feet, right? And it was sort of like, you could see it was a neighbor's garden, but it was like 3 or 4 feet that you've lost. So they'd go to the neighbor and they'd say, I'm moving in. Here's the survey. Please, you're going to have to move your garden or we're going to do this. And she'd say, no. And she's right, because there's possessory title. Right? You have especially in the older neighborhoods under the land registry system, you have possessory title if you've been using it for 10 years and it's open and undisturbed, right?
So 10 years is the minimum.
10 years is the minimum under this system, the registry system. Now we don't see as much as all the land is in the land title system, right? So we don't have that. But if it was in the old system, a registry system for 10 years, you would have that. And then if people try to sue and they go, well, you're on our property. And the courts have basically said in situations, especially where there's fences, you find out the fence has been there and then past the fence is 4 feet is actually your property. The courts have basically said when you came to look at the property, you saw the fences, you believe that was your property. You're getting exactly what you bargained for.
I think we've had this conversation before.
Have we? Yeah, 'cause I've seen it. Yeah, because it's happened. It happens, right? Where you're getting the fence, and when the survey is put up, when they finally get a survey, you realize there's 4 feet behind the fence, and there's nothing you can do if it's in the registry because it was open, continuous, and really it's what you bargained for. Unlike if you bought a 20-acre lot, right, or a piece of property, you have no idea where your borders are. So that'd be a different story if you found out it was less.
No, we had this conversation on our property we had sold back in the spring because on the land, again, go back to land.
I remember that now.
Yeah, land registry, our geo warehouse, the legal description, for the lot dimensions, because they didn't have a survey, were not rock solid. But then going back on the listing history, you could see everyone was kind of using the same measurements over. But then finally a survey was able to be dug up, and it was off by it wasn't massive. It was like 3 or 4 feet.
Right. Yeah.
So, but again, your point was if you like, visually you're seeing what you're buying. So if you're willing to accept what you're seeing, then
that's really what you bargained for. You really didn't bargain for the 3 feet beyond the fence.
No.
Right? So you're really getting what you bargained for in that kind of case. And I think that's what it is. It might be different if you were doing it for the purpose of development, and then it's obviously what you put onto the agreement as your frontage and your depth.
Right.
So if it matches the fence or it doesn't match the fence and you're buying it for building. We just had a situation at Avenue Road Lawrence in your area, where they have the alleyways sort of behind some of them.
Bedford Park, Woburn,
those streets, right? And then at a certain point, the alleyway stops, and then the houses go further.
Sure.
So they get confused because their neighbor might be 120 feet in depth, but they're 105 feet in depth. And I had exactly that situation where we had a lot that was, I think, 35 by 130. 35 by 125 on the agreement of person sale. And so I'm doing this search of title, and it's a meets and bounds, and I'm drawing it out, and I look and I go, this is 105 feet. And you do it 15 times because you think you're wrong, because how could this be right? This is wrong and you're right. And you look at it, and I draw it, it's 105 feet. Right. And then so what I did is I went onto one of these websites that I won't talk about that you can actually find out what previous owners bought for. And I went to see
I know which one that was.
And I went to see what other people in the neighborhoods, what they put for their frontage and their depth. And there's like 6 houses that are on the alleyway, and all of them had a different depth. Some people had 105, some people had 120. The people that sold prior to my clients actually had the 120. Right. But it really was 105, the alleyway. Right. So you go to your client and you basically say, it's a problem, right? You say, remember the 120 feet or the 125, you're actually getting 105. Right. And on the agreement, it actually says more or less.
Right.
So if you're off by a foot or two, you can't really argue it. That's what the more or less is.
But 15,
that's more than more or less.
I would say that's more than more or less. Yeah.
At the same time, it's sort of the end of it. And it's like, I don't think they bought it for, and they kind of admitted, we didn't really buy it for 120. 120 was just what they said it was, right? We're kind of happy with the backyard. So as a lawyer, you have them sign off on it. I advised you that it's not, it's 105 on your next agreement, make sure it's 105. But this is one of the scary things where,
but that's interesting because I know, this might be getting a little bit off topic, but I throw it out there. I know the city was selling those chunks of land back to the owners of the properties if they wanted to buy it. Because I just met with people that live on Bedford Park. And they actually bought the additional 10 feet in behind them from the old laneway, so to make their lot bigger, so they were able to push the fence back further.
I've seen that, and this wasn't the case because you would see the transfer from the city to it. I've seen it for Bedford. But this wasn't the case, and it is pretty significant. So it's one of the things to be very careful on that. Where I know where they got the depth, they probably just looked at the last listing because the last listing had the same thing. And it was really interesting to see, like with the 6 houses on this little block that had the smaller lots, that everyone had a different depth, even though they were all side by side. And I went into Google, satellite to look down on it, and I'm looking down and I see the alleyway, and then I see it stretch out there, and I can see how the mistake is made. Because the one person probably had it beside them and didn't even, and then from then on it just carried on that way. So, but it could be a way to get out of a deal.
For sure. I mean,
in a market like this, where the price might have gone down $100,000 or $200,000, and you have second thoughts, and now you're not giving what you bargained for.
Yeah, no, I mean that But I want to say is that's where it's more important now more than ever is to make sure that when you are working with somebody that they are taking the time to do the right due diligence.
Absolutely.
To make sure they are checking all that information, because you don't want to have those last minute surprises, because that's where all of a sudden you've been going back and forth on a deal until 2:00 in the morning, to all of a sudden have it blow up on you over a minute detail that you could have easily figured out in the beginning to avoid all that hassle in the first place, right? So,
absolutely.
Clauses.
Right.
Some people get very creative with their clauses. Yeah. Other people follow the standard clauses that are provided for them on web forms.
Right.
You ever seen anything that's just where were they going? What were they possibly thinking? How in the world did they come up with this? This has no legal
not so much. It's honestly really what you do is most of the clauses that you see are the standard that you pick them off. They're really picked off for that. I really can't think off the top of my head There probably have been, because I remember kind of saying, looking at a few where I've had to read it a few times going, I don't know what they're doing with this thing.
Right.
But for the most part, I can't really think of anything so crazy. It is pretty standard that you see. Most of the agreements do follow the TREB standard clauses.
Right.
So I wish I could tell you a crazy story, but most of them are pretty standard. And it's getting more basic now than it ever was.
Right.
There used to be a lot more protection clauses. And I think because of what's happened in the market, how it was such a seller's market and everyone was afraid to put too many clauses in. And I think that sort of has changed the way the agreements look. They're more, the Schedule A isn't as long as it used to be, but the protection schedules B and C that the agents put in are sort of the standard ones that you see.
Right. Well, it's interesting because my uncle is selling his property down in Ontario, California, not Ontario, Canada, Ontario, California. Right. And so he asked me to take a look at the listing agreement just to kind of see if there's anything there that stood out or I should be aware of. And I said, well, I mean, like I'm sure it's different than what we use because it's Canadian versus California in the US. Anyways, it was 50 pages.
The listing,
The listing agreement in California is 50.
Because they're more litigious in the United States, and that's what it is.
Yeah. So I explained, because I called down to a friend of mine who works in San Francisco, and I asked her, and she is like, I go, is this really legit? And she's like, yep. She goes, in fact, his is a smidgen shorter than what they normally usually are. So you got off easy on this one.
Yeah,
so
I think it's all about litigation.
Wow. Yeah, it's crazy.
I did see an agreement about 3 weeks ago, which wasn't crazy, but I understood it. But they actually put in it that they acknowledged the fact that there was a death in the house that may have been the result of a murder.
That's actually a good thing to talk about right now.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask you about it. So because like house stigmas, right? Like not stigmas.
Yes.
So because those like on disclosure levels, those come up all the time. So so if someone has committed like suicide, for instance, in a house.
Yes.
Right. What's the statute of limitations on disclosure on that?
I don't think there's a statute of limitations on that. My understanding is, so we live in the world of caveat emptor. It's a buyer beware world. And I think the case law goes all different ways on it. I believe the agent has a duty to disclose, but I don't think the seller has a duty to disclose.
So what you're saying is that so if the seller knows that it happened, but doesn't tell the agent, then that agent's not responsible for this.
The agent has no knowledge.
You can't
the disclosure requirements of an agent are higher than the seller. So we have a buyer beware policy, so we don't have to disclose anything as a seller. We can't hide, right? The only thing we have to disclose is something that causes a danger to a buyer.
Right.
Other than that, it's buyer beware. Go do your inspection and find everything you possibly can. Right. So I don't believe I think that this has gone kind of back and forth. We have discussions on it. So I believe that the seller doesn't have the obligation to say if there was a suicide actually in Ontario in the house. But an agent does. Right.
It's interesting because we actually had a house that we sold where unfortunately the owner had committed suicide. Yeah. So, but because we knew them, it was like we were fully in the know.
Right. Yeah.
So we had to disclose because, I mean, that could completely affect people's decisions about.
And this specific house was actually, if you Googled the house, it was in the news.
Right.
So that's why they made them put it in there, because it was very public. Right. In this specific situation that I read.
Right.
That in this specific agreement.
Right.
For that kind of
Yeah. No, and then what about with fires?
It's the condition of the house. So I don't believe you have any. It's like, people always say, why didn't you tell me 3 years ago that you had a problem with X, Y, and Z, whether there was a fire or any kind of major problem you might have had. The roof caved in 6 years ago. I fixed the roof. There hasn't been a problem in it. I don't have to disclose when there's no problem.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And that's really what it is. Like if I fix something, I don't have to tell you, everything I fixed over the last 20 years of owning a home. Right? I only have to tell you if there's an issue at that time.
Right.
So if there's a fire, but I fixed it and it's in proper condition structurally, I don't believe I have to tell you that. If you bring an inspector in who says there's a structural issue, that's how you'll find out.
Right, sure.
Right? As long as there's no danger. If I know there's a danger, then I got to tell you. And that's what it's about. Like anything that could cause a danger, I've got to disclose. Other than that, it's buyer beware.
Do you see Ontario ever coming to effect with like seller disclosure statements? Like as far like I know like in BC, like so
Yeah.
for those I was an agent in Vancouver for 9 years before I moved here 18 years ago. So I've worked in two of the craziest markets in Canada. Right. So in BC, they have they call it a property disclosure statement, or here they talked about it. They have them.
They do have them. You don't have to complete
them. They're
them.
not enforced.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you see?
The theme of the courts really is buyer beware.
Right.
And the case law continually emphasizes the buyer beware. So from what I can see, I don't think that it's going to come in. I don't think it's a bad idea. I think it would help the buyers. And I'm not, sometimes it's not fair because you have even the latent defects, the defects you can't find out till after. Okay, it's a latent defect. I mean, it's so expensive to sue somebody in our province that it's not even worth it. And most people can't afford it anyways after they purchased a house. So to find out things before is all you really have for most people.
Yeah, and that's why we do, as marketing agent, that's why we typically do a pre-home inspection, because like the idea is that if there is something that comes up in the home inspection report, if it's enough that something needs to be fixed, we want to take care of it in advance so it becomes a non-issue.
Right. And in the market that we've lived in for a few years, where you had so many offers coming in, so if you put the inspection clause in, you weren't going to be accepted.
No.
You were living off of that pre-home inspection. The problem with the pre-home inspection is there's no privity of contract between the inspector and the buyer.
Right.
So if the inspector misses 10 things that could even be obvious, the buyer has no recourse against them.
Yeah.
So that's one of the problems that we had with it. And that was just the market. People were going in blind almost in that market, but it's the market, right?
Yeah,
but you couldn't do anything about it. I mean, my wife and I were looking for a home a couple of years ago, and there was one, and the inspection report really scared us off. We were appreciative of it. Right. It told us all the repairs, it told us the expenses. So it was great to have. But at the same time, I mean, the one we had just purchased basically said, this house is amazing. Everything is great. Well, let's hope so, because being a lawyer, I know if he's wrong, there's nothing we can do.
Yeah, no, I had clients same thing. They bought a house back in the spring, and we talked earlier about the working order versus good working order, and there were a whole bunch of things that the seller signed off that said that were in working order, and they were not even close to being in working order, and it's going to end up in a big lawsuit. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes.
And it all depends on the cost, because if it costs $2,000.
No, this is like close to $60,000 worth of.
That's a different story. But most people who have this have dishwashers, washing machines, certain issues, deficiencies that might add up to $3,000 or $4,000. But by the time first of all, your lawyer is going to cost you more if you want to hire a lawyer for that, right? And then even to serve and et cetera, it's a few $100s to get there.
Right.
So a lot of people, even though they have absolutely an amazing case and it's 100% right and the seller is 100% wrong, it's just so expensive to do it. So that's the hard part of our business right now.
It's unfortunate. But speaking of the hard part, we're running out of time, my friend, and I don't want to keep you any longer than you've already been here, because I know your time is extremely valuable, and I appreciate you being here in the first place. If you're looking to hire a real estate lawyer and you want someone who's ethical, who's honest, who answers his phone and responds back to emails in a very promptly fashion, Stephen Cooper is definitely the man you want to be talking to, and that's why I've been using him for over 15 years. And Stephen, I appreciate your time so much. My pleasure. That's all we got for today. Make sure to follow us along on YouTube, subscribe to our channel. Check us out on Spotify, Amazon, and Google. And stay tuned for our next episode. Take care and happy holidays. All the best. Talk to you soon. Bye.